welcome to another edition of What's Happening. I'm George Binns, and we have as our guest this evening the candidate for City Councilor at Large, Julie Flowers. Welcome, Julie.
Thank you very much, George. It's nice to be back with you on the show.
Good. And you've been out knocking on doors, I assume, and what do you hear from the people?
Yeah, I've been walking with different volunteers, and people have been helping me out with my campaign and trying to be all around different neighborhoods in Beverly. And I would say there are obviously people have some disparate concerns and questions that are
different sections of town
that are personal, but I think the overarching, there's a few that come up over and over again. And so one of those is really about, and this probably won't surprise you, I think even from conversations we've had before, but people are really thinking about how we want our city to continue to grow and develop and what the balance is. People will ask a lot about, and I think it's a good question, how do we strike the balance between having a city that's thriving and growing and makes space for new business, new housing, which this is sort of a separate topic, but new housing, which is really needed across our region, but at the same time really make sure that we're preserving our green spaces and keeping track of how our infrastructure grows with, as our city grows. And by that, I mean, making sure that our fire, our police can keep up, that our school system is able to continue to keep up as new families move in. So that's a big conversation that I'm having with people at the doors is just how do we find that balance, and how do we continue to see our city grow and thrive, and also make sure that the quality of life and the green space and the resiliency along the coastline, all of those things are coming into the conversation now as we look forward.
Well, I've done a bunch of shows where I just ask, what's the character of Beverly? And a lot of people struggle with that. And about the cleanest answer I got was from Wes Slate one time. I caught him at the Y, and he said, the character of Beverly is change. And you think about it, this used to be a mill town.
Yeah.
You look at the south end of Rantoul Street, you got all the old mills.
Sure.
The millinery and a few of the others. The Cummings Center is essentially a big mill, textile machinery mill. But yeah. And right now there's really no business like that, although Dunham Road and Cherry Hill are starting to develop. So it's really a tough question, I guess, to where do we go from here and how do we get there?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think change is a good answer from, I want to give deference to Wes, because I think to a certain extent, all communities, especially a city like Beverly, there is a certain degree of change that's always going to be happening to continue. As you said, as the types of businesses even change. We've seen our downtown really change and grow into a much more sort of thriving downtown with a large art scene, with theaters that are there to anchor that, and we've got Montserrat as a great art school right down there, and the Beverly Arts District. So things that are always sort of changing and growing. But when I think about Beverly, something else I think about as someone who grew up here, and then I moved around a little bit in Massachusetts. I didn't venture very far, but I do think about Beverly as a place where people really, it has a sense of place, and people really, once they find their way here, maybe they grew up here, but other times people are moving here, people really call it home. It's a place where people, if they're raised here, often they return to raise their own families here. If they're newer here, I think people can really find a place where they can put down roots and be part of the community and really want to stay and make a place. And so I think of Beverly as it's a city with a sense of place and belonging for people, and does sort of have the right balance between, and I think we're continuing to strike it better and better with our downtown, but things to do, places to go, artists' work to see, and a real sense of community and home. So for me, that's a big part of Beverly's character, and it's what brought me back as an adult. When I was growing up, I thought as a child, I'm not gonna live in Beverly my whole life. And then as an adult, I realized, Beverly is really a place where I would like to call home.
You develop a sense of comfort with the area, and you start to talk about the downtown. I've been here a few years, and when I was here, there was 2 department stores downtown, and a bunch of other clothing, shoe stores, and that. They're all gone. Now the downtown is mostly fast food and 2 theaters. And you start to wonder, okay, is that the way it's going to stay? Is that the way it's going to be for a while? And we've had a lot of development in the Rantoul Street area, condos, apartment houses,
Yep.
with commercial space below. Is that the character that's going to become the standard for, like, Cabot Street?
I think Cabot Street and Rantoul Street, although they have both developed even from where they were, 10 years ago, I think they do have their own distinct flavor still, each of them, which they have all along. But I do think, Rantoul, as you said, has sort of developed into housing with retail space below. My sense is that Cabot is going to maintain its sort of character of smaller independent sort of retail stores. If there is housing along Cabot, it tends to be smaller scale. And so my sense is that they're going to maintain their separate kind of flavor and identity, which I think is a strength of Beverly's downtown, that there's sort of a little bit of everything, a little bit for everyone. But it's interesting that you mentioned about how there were previously department stores, sort of anchors.
Yeah.
I recently had a conversation with Leslie Gould, who's the executive director of the Greater Beverly Chamber. And she and I began to talk about that because she was saying, wouldn't it be interesting to think about, a city like Beverly probably could support some kind of an anchor store. And of course, in the past, we've also, had Casa de Moda, which was sort of a thriving and broader kind of retail. And I think you'll still hear people talk about how much they miss that. And so I think her point is well taken, that one of the things we can do a lot when we shop local and patronize our local businesses in Beverly, which I think is important. Those local businesses, we want to patronize them. We want to be supporting them. Those are our neighbors, our friends who both own and work at them. But there are some things we still have to we have to drive to a mall, right? Or we have to order online. And so I was interested in talking with her to sort of get her thoughts about what kind of broader retail, something that might be apparel or shoes, that Beverly really could support something like that. And it would allow us to keep more money right in our Beverly economy.
Well, the big drawback that I think to Rantoul Street and Cabot Street and the downtown area is you can't buy food.
Yeah, once Bell Market was not there anymore, right?
And you think about the model of Stop and Shop or some of the other stores out on Dodge Street. They have to have a big parking lot and a fairly good-sized building. Doesn't really fit in downtown.
Yeah, a large box kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you'd like to have reasonable access to food, maybe a mom and pop kind of grocery store, but Bell Market didn't make it. So that's a drawback, I think, to having a community based on the downtown. So the downtown seems to be just arts and entertainment. And I don't see how we get anything else from it then.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. And I'm thinking, too, about that during some parts of the year, how fortunate it is, we have the farmers market that is sort of adjacent to our downtown and is really walkable, too, for people who might live in that area, maybe don't have a car or choose not to use their car as often. I think one of the things we're striving for in Beverly is to be a more walkable city, to be a more bike-friendly city. But the farmers market can't as easily exist in the winter months. So I know there's been talk before with the farmers market themselves about where they could maybe find some indoor space for that part of the year in the downtown. And so that might be really interesting, I think, for us to pursue in a partnership with them, because that's a little different than the kind of market that Bell Market was. Yeah. But it definitely would increase people's access to be able to get food and be walkable.
A frivolous thing, I would call frivolous. It's nice to do kind of thing, but you can't count on it, and you can't get milk and eggs kind of thing. It's just vegetables.
Sometimes milk and eggs. I think they've expanded And so I think if we can find a way to keep supporting it too, it's a great way to bring some of our local farmers to be able to do business here. But I also was thinking one thing that I think is such a strength of the Beverly Farmers Market, and they're not the only one in our area that does this, but they do also accept accept SNAP benefits. So there really is, I think when farmers markets first entered the scene, they did have that feel of they're nice for some people, but they're not accessible to everybody. And so I think the fact that now local farmers and farmers markets accept SNAP benefits is such a strength because, we know that one of the things that contributes to food insecurity is exactly what you're talking about, which is lack of access. People who don't live near where they can buy affordable food or high quality food. And so I think that the fact that SNAP benefits are accepted at farmers markets, to me, is huge because it increases access so much and doesn't make them sort of a niche place where only some people can go.
The closest I could think of that is Walgreens keeps talking about they're going to shut down that store at Elliott Street in Rantoul. That would be the kind of thing that, it's almost a market.
Yeah, bigger square footage for sure.
Yeah, it's got square footage. It's got a parking lot. It's, again, walkable within the Rantoul, Cabot Street area.
Yeah.
So there's an opportunity, I think, that maybe it will turn into something. But you just have to think about the rest of the city. And it's a very diverse city. You've got a lot of areas like the farms and Pride's Crossing that are strictly single-family housing. And even where I live, Prospect Hill is mostly single-family, so some three-deckers. Yeah. But we started to talk back earlier about the kind of housing that's going to be available with the Briscoe modifications.
Yes.
Of how did you call that again?
Oh, it's going to be the Briscoe Center for Housing and the Arts.
No, there's something about kind of housing.
Oh, deeply affordable.
Deeply affordable.
Deeply affordable. Yeah.
So deeply affordable housing. So. That satisfies, I think, one of the comments that Andrew DeFrenza keeps making, that he's got more people on the waiting list than he's got space for, and they will never get to it, kind of thing. So that gets us into the issues of how do we maintain the spaces we've got. The problem we had this past year with the elevators going out in one of the buildings, that's difficult in most buildings, but in the housing for the elderly, that's a minor disaster kind of thing. So I think this is one of the areas that I don't hear being talked about very much of, hey, we've got a lot of resources, and it's going to take time and money to maintain them, and that ain't happening. So I think we get to the issue of what kind of initiatives can the city council have to bring up these things and get something going, because one of the things that bothers me about the city charters is now the city council has only one authority. You can line item veto. And this is like the nuclear option in Congress. It's all or nothing. And at the same time, I think the city councilors, like you're doing, walking around, you're getting some information. How do you translate that information into active plans?
Yeah, I think one of the ways that the City Council really, you're right, with the charter, when it comes to the budget, the City Council can't add money to a line item, absolutely, at this point. That's as our charter is written. We can make recommendations. Sometimes we can come together to say we would recommend taking this money from this line item, and where we'd like to see it go is in this line item. But you're right, ultimately it's the mayor's authority right now in our city to make that decision. I do think that there are ways that the City Council can use policy, can work together to create ordinances, or specifically I'm thinking about with housing, zoning is one tool that really can be helpful in creating and increasing housing or flexibility for housing. And that is something that as city councilors we can, and of course our planning department can as well, and often does, file ordinances like that. But a city councilor could also, or multiples of city councilors, work together to propose a new ordinance or a change to an ordinance. So I think one of the things I think about all the time with housing that's a good example of how that's happened in the past here is the city council put forth, I believe it was Councilor Rand who actually submitted it at the time, but the city council voted it into action, which was our inclusionary zoning ordinance, which basically adjusted. It was a change to it to adjust when a new property is being built, when a new development is happening. Inclusionary zoning, and I know you know this, but just for folks who may not be as familiar, means including affordable units within the context of any new building that's coming. And so at the time, our inclusionary zoning called for 12% of the units to be affordable. When you and I were just talking about deep affordability, I think is a reference to the fact that we live in an expensive area. It's a high cost of living, high average median income. And that means that the formula that, HUD or the national government uses to calculate what is affordable often still isn't affordable for many people. And so our changed ordinance and what it gave us the ability to do was say a new development could perhaps opt to have 10% of the units be affordable, but they have to be a more deep affordability. And so that's just one example of what has been done. I would love to see us continue to think about, and this is happening at the state level too, this conversation. So the state may beat us to it, but talking about accessory dwelling by right, that's an ordinance change. But it would mean that for a lot of people who may want to add what's typically been called an in-law apartment, it would make it a lot easier. I've met people seniors who have moved here to live with adult children, perhaps. And one woman was telling me the story about all the difficulty. It's not easy without an ADU by right kind of ordinance to navigate sort of the process by how you can get that added. And so she just said to me, my daughter had the time and the ability and the
tenacity.
To be able to sort of navigate that process or to take time off from work to to go to the hearings. And she said, but not everybody can. And she said, I think about the other seniors, people in her position, who they might also have family or not family. That you may be able to rent a small apartment from someone who certainly has the space. So that's something I think city councilors can do, is we can hear what people are talking about, hear the need. And then there are tools at our disposal to work to try to address those needs.
The last election cycle, we were doing a show with Chris Silverstein.
Oh, yeah.
And she was mentioning that when she got her teacher's degree, she had to find a roommate so they could have enough money between them to rent an apartment. So there is this situation that people that have got pretty good jobs have a problem finding local accommodations. And you start to think about Folly Hill, Cherry Hill. There's the areas that's got some space that can be redeveloped, mostly Folly Hill. But you run into the problem there that the surrounding residents are in fear of the traffic, and they are pushing back against it. So I think you got involved in this discussion with the National Grid the other day of, they want to put another cable in. We only got one cable feeding the town now because the other cable that was buried died. And yet they're pushing back against digging up the street and putting in a new cable. So to some extent, I think this is one of the functions of the council. It's not written into the charter, but how do you convince the people, hey, it's good for all of us?
Yeah, I think, and with the National Grid cable, I think with the questions that were arising with that, it was not so much, no, we don't want the cable at all, but why can't it be in the existing right-of-way, which is, as you're saying, which is where the cable, there's a right-of-way along the railroad where the existing cable runs. And you're right, the existing cable is not functional. Yeah. And so I think part of the question, and I think that, to me, this is also the question for National Grid is, especially if they need to go back and clean out the old cable because the old cable is leaking, it's an environmental problem. Why not just run the cable there? And, that way, you've already got the right-of-way, you can get the cable in, and I think the question for residents that they just would like more information, and I agree National Grid has not yet supplied that is what are the effects on the human body of having the electromagnetic field from a high tension cable like that so close to our home, and I think we don't have that information yet. So part of that was, can we pause this till we can have that information and make sure that this is something that would be safe, and why not just run it in the existing right of way where then it really is not so much in residential neighborhoods.
Yeah. So I think, again, this is the kind of thing that really surprised me when somebody up in North Beverly, excuse me, put a solar collector on their front lawn. And all the neighbors got terribly upset on it. And it almost got to be a joke about, it's not in my backyard, it's not even in your front yard, kind of thing. So I think this is an area that, again, I think there needs to be some leadership from the city council to convince people that, hey, we're in a city, we're all in this together. And a lot of people are advocating for solar and wind and that kind of opportunity, but it doesn't solve all the problems. There are still residual problems. 24/7, you want electricity. So there has to be other alternatives and other solutions.
Absolutely, and I think part of that conversation about and with National Grid, I think too that I think that's what you see the councilors who are involved trying to represent the voice of the residents or help amplify their voice. It's also asking National Grid, or as a city, I think, and as cities in our region, we could have a lot of power together to really encourage them too to be thoughtful about, let's not just replace this cable to be resilient right now, but let's think about really what is the long term, what is the long term for cleaner and more renewable energy. And the current situation where National Grid has an older cable up on Goat Hill, that is a place where it's been leaking for a while. And so as a city, again, really making sure that we're having the conversations with some of these big utility companies, not only about how we want to look to the future, but also about cleaning up any kind of environmental or pollution hazard that already exists from before. I think the folks on Weber Avenue were talking about what already exists in their area and the concerns that it raises for them. And I think that's important for our city as a community. I think you're right to talk about what's good for all of us. So for those of us who don't live right up there on the hill and see that happening all the time, for all of us to know too that what's good for our neighbors on Goat Hill is to encourage these big utility companies to make sure that they're being responsible neighbors and cleaning up any kind of discarded old technology that's polluting the area where our friends and neighbors live. So I think that's part of our coming together.
Well, they are in this National Grid. You keep talking about them. They went through my neighborhood a couple of years ago, replaced all the gas lines, and they're still working around replacing gas lines. And maybe some of it is a reaction to the problems they had in Lowell, but at the other hand, I think they're recognizing that these old lines don't last forever, and it's an ongoing maintenance problem, which gets me back to some of the issues the city has. We lost a swimming pool at the Beverly Golf and Tennis because it couldn't be maintained. We still don't have bleachers on the home side of Herd Stadium. So, there's a lot of these issues that they irritate some people, not others. And it's back to what's good for the whole city. And that's where I think a lot of emphasis needs to be placed. And how do we get the city council to get involved in that kind of thing? And I'm guessing right now, and I hope it doesn't cause you a problem, but you will most likely be president of the board.
Guess we'll find out, I guess.
We'll find out.
After November 2nd.
As the only incumbent running, you've got a base that none of the other candidates have. So I'll make that assumption. I don't think it's too much of a stretch. How is you going to provide? What kind of leadership do you think you're going to provide? What's your approach to that?
Sure. Yeah, and I want to say, thank you first of all for your making that assumption, and I also just want to say, I'm so honored to be running in this pool. I think we've got 5 great candidates for at-large. I think you've interviewed them all, so I think I might be the 5th. So,
yeah.
So you already know how great they are, and it'll be, the voters will get a chance to decide which at-large candidate becomes the council president, which is such a unique system here in Beverly.
Yeah.
I think we're the only city in the Commonwealth that has exactly that structure. So, I'm going to work as hard as I can to run the best campaign I can and meet people and try to just make sure that I'm hearing from voters and trying to do the best job I can as a public servant. If I were to become the council president, which I think is your question,
yeah.
The first thing I've been thinking a lot about recently is communication from our city, not just from our council, but the council plays a role. When I look across the bridge at Salem, I think we can learn from each other all the time. I was on a Zoom last night with the Salem City Council because we're doing this project called Resilient together. And so we're learning from each other. And one thing I think Salem does very well is they communicate. They have a communications staff person on the city side of their government and the school side. And of course, that's a budget decision that we would then have to make. But what I think happens sometimes in Beverly is communication is sort of everybody's job because we're running with a little leaner staff than across the bridge. But as we know, when something is everybody's job, it often can be the thing that falls through the cracks.
Yeah.
And there's so much happening in our city right now. I think more and more we're seeing how imperative good communication is. So, as a counselor, as a leader on the council, I would like to play a role in our looking at that in the coming budget cycle. I want to play my own personal role in how the council can be strong in communication. But I think our city really needs, because we're growing and there's a lot happening, a stronger plan for our communication at this point. So I think that's a piece. And I think bringing the council together to do some goal setting together and think about where as counselors, what priorities are different counselors bringing? What are the hopes? What are they hearing from their wards? That's a way I think of bringing those voices from each neighborhood. You talked about how diverse Beverly is in terms of the types of neighborhoods. The 6 ward counselors are such, they're the first point of contact in many ways. And so bringing them together to really do sort of a goal setting, a retreat, if you will, I think might be one option. And I know in the past the council has had a chance to do that. During the pandemic, we didn't so much get to do that. So I'd love to see us do that and really let the ward counselors help to bring forward, what's happening in each part of the city and how can the council then set some goals around that.
Well, again, the point you're making with the diversity, each ward has got a different set of agendas and problems and that need to be worked on. And some of these things, it's a local problem, but it has ramifications for the entire city. So that's where the councils at large, I think, get involved at, how do we get this thing fixed so that everybody takes advantage of it. But believe it or not, we've had a half hour of fun.
It always goes by so fast when I talk with you.
So we're down to the point of you taking over the camera and you having your say as to why you should vote for me.
Well, thank you. Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you to everyone who watched this interview with George and with me. It's always a pleasure, George, to be with you on the show. And, it's been a real honor. I'm finishing up my 2nd term as one of your at-large city councilors. It's been an incredible honor to get to serve you and to meet people across the city, those of you that maybe I knew before I ran, got to know you better, and I've met so many people that I had not known before and continue to have that happen every day, knocking on doors, responding to emails. And I would be incredibly honored to serve in a 3rd term as one of your at-large counselors and would be honored to have one of your votes in the at-large race. You can choose 3 out of the 5 candidates that you'll see on your ballot on November 2nd, and I would be honored to be one of those. So thank you for even considering that, and I look forward to continued conversation and good work together.
Great. So wish you the best of luck. And
thank you, George.
And it looks like we're going to have an interesting race. And with 5 people, that's more than I think we've had in quite a while. So
it's good engagement.
People got a choice. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us this evening. And we'll be doing some more of these shows with the different candidates. And again, if I forgot to say something or I forgot to ask a question, my email address shows up at the end of the credits. Send me an email and we'll add it in. And again, if you've got a different opinion, send me an email. We can get you in here and have a seat. And thanks again, ladies and gentlemen, and stay tuned. We'll be doing more.